Did you know you can become president of the United States by winning just 22% of the popular vote? But how? Kind of ironic for a country that prides itself on defending democracy. Well, it all has to do with the system created by our founding fathers over 230 years ago called the Electoral College. In the Electoral College system, each state is assigned a certain number of votes proportional to its size. The bigger the state's population, the more votes it receives. There are a total of 538 votes, and you must win at least 270 votes to become president. Sounds fair, right? Well, not necessarily. In this system, each state receives 2 electoral votes for its 2 U.S. senators, and 1 electoral vote for each member it has in the House of Representatives, guaranteeing every state at least 3 votes. Washington, D.C. also receives 3 electoral votes because of the 23rd Amendment. The problem with this distribution is that some of the least populated states now get 3 or 4 votes instead of 1 or 2 relative to their population, taking away votes from the heavily populated states. As a result, Americans in these states have their vote count for less than an American who lives in these states. Now, the whole point of the Electoral College was to protect the small states by giving them more voting power. But in practice, it doesn't really make much of a difference. Presidential candidates still focus their efforts on the same swing states, only a few of which are actually small. So we know a presidential candidate must win at least 270 out of the 538 electoral votes to win the presidency. This means that a majority of the country has to vote for a candidate to become president, right? Wrong again. The distribution of the votes in the winner-take-all policy actually makes it possible for a candidate to win the presidency with only 22% of the popular vote. Theoretically, if you received 50.1% of the popular vote in each of the red-colored states, and the other candidate received 100% of the popular vote in each of the blue-colored states, you would narrowly win the Electoral College and become president with only 22% of the popular vote. With these outdated technicalities, it should be no surprise that there have been calls to abolish the Electoral College. On October 9, 2024, an article was released reporting that at a fundraiser, Vice Presidential candidate Tim Walz said the Electoral College voting system, quote, needs to go, end quote, in favor of the national popular vote. With the real possibility that Donald Trump will win a second term while losing the popular vote again, it makes sense why Walz wants to abolish the system. But what many don't know is how popular this position is among Republicans. Pew Research Center has been asking voters this question every presidential election since 2012. While it is no surprise that Democrats have heavily supported abolishing the system in favor of a national popular vote, it is interesting to see how Republicans view the issue over time. In 2012, 54% of Republicans supported abolishing the Electoral College compared to 43% who opposed it. Unsurprisingly, this number flipped dramatically after Donald Trump won the 2016 election while losing the popular vote, but it is interesting to see the 42% margin shrink to just 7% among Republicans in the last 8 years. Collectively, 63% of Americans support abolishing the Electoral College in favor of a national popular vote. But unfortunately, it really doesn't matter what the general public thinks, because even though there is significant support for changing the rules, it is almost impossible to do so. Abolishing the Electoral College would require a constitutional amendment, which has a notoriously low success rate of 0.2%. The reason it is almost impossible to pass a constitutional amendment, even with popular support, is because it would require Congress to do something frankly unheard of: actually work together. To pass a constitutional amendment, at least 2/3 of both the House of Representatives and the Senate need to vote in favor, which is extremely unlikely to happen due to partisan divide. If this occurs, and that's a big if, then at least 3/4 of all state legislatures must vote to ratify the amendment, and that can take a very long time. For example, take the 27th Amendment, the most recent one to pass. 7 states voted to pass this amendment from 1789 to 1792, but then we kind of forgot about it for a few years. Fast forward past a few minor events, such as the War of 1812, the Civil War, the First and Second World Wars, Vietnam and Korea, all the way to 1983, when Maine voted to ratify the amendment, sparking renewed interest. By May of 1992, 3/4 of the state legislatures voted to pass the amendment, and it was finally ratified after 202 years. So who knows? With the speed of government work, we might be chilling with Wall-E by the time this amendment gets passed. So if it's almost impossible to abolish the Electoral College, what can we do? As we mentioned earlier, the way each state awards its electoral votes is up to the state, and a few states have gotten creative. Ever wondered why Nebraska and Maine have a small circle included in their state? It's because these states use a congressional district method rather than a straight popular vote. This method awards an electoral vote for the winner of each congressional district and 2 electoral votes for the winner of the state's popular vote. For example, in 2020, Donald Trump won Nebraska's 1st and 3rd congressional districts and the state's popular vote, while Joe Biden won the 2nd congressional district. As a result, Donald Trump received 4 electoral votes and Joe Biden received 1. Similarly, Joe Biden won Maine's 1st congressional district and the state's popular vote, while Donald Trump won the 2nd congressional district. So Joe Biden received 3 electoral votes and Donald Trump received 1. If all 50 states plus Washington, D.C. chose to use this method, the electoral map would change significantly. Joe Biden would have still won the 2020 presidential election, but by a much smaller margin of 278 to 260. About 2/3 of the voting eligible population turned out for the 2020 presidential election, the highest rate of any national election since 1900. Yet millions of Americans still chose not to vote. While there are many reasons for this, a common theme emerges when you ask non-voters why. Something across the lines of, "My vote doesn't matter." While the congressional district method wouldn't make every vote equal, it compels citizens who live in solid Republican or Democrat states, but in a swing district, to still go out and vote. With ABC currently predicting a narrow 271 to 267 electoral victory for Donald Trump, this race is going to come down to turnout, and we need a voting system that incentivizes more people to vote. Regardless if you prefer Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, or neither of them, please go out and vote on November 5th. If you really don't like either of the candidates, you are allowed to go to the polls and vote for neither of them, called a protest vote. One of the greatest privileges we have as American citizens is to vote in free and fair elections, something millions of people around the world will never do. This country isn't perfect, but it can improve if millions of Americans sit this one out. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe to stay up to date with all things Health Geography Hub.